Okay, you ready? You ready?
Yes.
Okay. Welcome to another episode of Steve and Max. I'm Steve.
I'm Max.
And today's conversation topic is one that most people would say is a no-brainer. Watchmen. Which do you prefer, the graphic novel or the movie? We're going to each talk for a minute, and then we'll say our points, and then we'll go back and forth. So Max, I'll let you start off.
Sure, so if you're a follower of Steve O Cubed, it should come as no surprise that I find the comic book version to be far superior to the movie adaptation. Now, I personally believe that the movie is very good, very enjoyable. I can watch it over and over again, but it's still... It misses a lot, and it's due to the medium. It's not really the fault of the director or the actors, with the possible exception of the Silk Spectre, the second one. But the movie is good, but the comic book is able to capture so much more, and also the comic book is a product of its time, whereas the movie is kind of this weird, not relic, but it's trying to look back at a time that we no longer are experiencing, that fear of nuclear annihilation. And so that was very pregnant in the comic. It was part of, like, every page almost, was the fear of nuclear annihilation. And so that is the basic encapsulation of why I feel that the graphic novel is superior.
Funny that you brought that up, because I'm going to go with the movie. First of all, right off the bat, I'm going to say that 99.999% of people out there will disagree with me. I know that. I know that this looks like a losing argument. I was going to start off with a different point, but I wanted to actually go to what you said first about the fact that the graphic novel is like the whole like nuclear holocaust is a huge part of it. It's just like every page of it is like brings that concept in. I actually thought the movie did a better job of making that relevant and making it relevant the fact how countries and human beings deal with each other. If we're talking about the ending, I'm going to go straight there. I thought the...
Oh, spoiler alert.
Oh yeah, super spoiler alert. Don't watch this if you haven't seen the movie.
Or read the comic book.
Yes.
One or the other.
Yes. So the fact that in the movie they made Dr. Manhattan the threat and not a giant squid, I thought it like more what fell into the theme of what makes human beings kind of like interact with each other in a certain way out of like fear of like that nuclear fear. Like it felt like the squid felt like almost like random, almost comic booky. So it almost took away from that tone of the whole rest of the graphic novel. The other thing I want to talk about is, no, let me just leave it at that.
Sure.
That's my opening salvo.
Sure.
Yeah.
So kind of to respond to your comment about the ending,
Yeah.
I certainly agree that as far as like a tighter narration, which a movie medium requires, then making the threat Dr. Manhattan, it really doesn't change much of the story. It helps because they cut out the whole island subplot. They cut out a lot of my stuff, and I know one of the things that really frustrates me when I watch a movie and I've read the book or the comic book it's based off of, and I notice some differences and I want to Google what the differences are and what people are saying about it.
Right.
One of the things that really annoys me is that so many of these websites will have pages that are like, in the book, and sorry, I'm a nerd, Hermione's drinking from like it clearly says in the book she's drinking from a brass tumbler, but in the movie it's a clear plastic, or clear glass cup. And it's like, who cares about differences like that?
Yeah.
Like the fact that they cut out all or almost all of the minor characters,
Right.
but at the same time gave them cameos, was their way of saying, look, we would have liked to include them in the film, would have been too long.
Right.
For those of you who've read the comic, you know who these people are.
Uh-huh.
And I have not watched, full disclosure, I have not watched the extended cut of the movie. I've just seen the theatrical version, both in movies and on DVD, available at fine retailers everywhere.
Or my apartment.
But But yeah, and so I agree with you that Change of Dr. Manhattan helps with the tighter narration, but I think that you kind of missed, in your discussion of the ending, you missed the much bigger change, which was Vet's entire character. That in the movie, he is a supervillain. And in...
Who are you talking about? What did you say?
Osmodeus.
Okay, what did you say before?
Vet, that's his last name.
Oh, okay.
Veidt.
Okay.
And I'd like to call the character by his real name because that was one of the things that also, one of the themes that I felt got lost in the movie was, this was, the point of the novel was to say that vigilantism is wrong, and that superheroes as a concept is kind of a bad thing, and not just because the dependence upon them and their flawed nature, but that whole, when you're above the law, you stop following it. And that was something that you really didn't see in the film, was Rorschach's, you know, I'm using his name now. Okay, I'll just stick to the superhero names. Rorschach's development of a character, where even if you look at the panels, where they're the flashbacks, his character looks different and in a way more innocent, more like The Question than Rorschach, as far as the lighting, his posture, and he becomes a violent murderer. And that is partly because he's a vigilante. And that's the other thing also, that about that whole capturing that moment in time of the graphic novel, is that there was a lot of anti-war sentiment about Vietnam, and the comedian was a Vietnam vet, and he was a psychopath. And that's something that, you know, we've, as a society, have kind of looked back on and said, you know, look, those were just kids, and, you know, we really can't, you know, the whole support the troop movement is kind of saying we're against the war, but we support the troops. This was before that. And so he was the cliche platoon psychopathic Vietnam vet.
So you're saying can you just summarize what you think the central theme of the graphic novel is?
The central theme of the graphic novel is that you can't trust superheroes, that they are flawed individuals.
See, I got a totally different read. Like, we were just, I guess, like, we're not even disagreeing about the medium, we're just disagreeing about like what the message is. I mean, and I feel like the movie hits the same tone. I think the whole thing about superheroes is the message that with, you know, okay, to go to Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility, but the responsibility, no matter what you choose, right, things are fucked up. So it's not like, even like when you try to do good, your hands are gonna get dirty. And like, it's like sort of like that moral ambiguity, because like, I think what Watchmen does really well is it captures the fact that you can do good by doing shitty things, and you can do shitty, you know, like vice versa. You know, the comedian is like a perfect embodiment of that. And like, I felt like that ending was like almost like a giant version of like the whole thing with the comedian.
No, you see, I really felt that the message of the comic, which did get muddled and a bit lost in the movie, was that power corrupts. And certainly with Dr. Manhattan, you can say, oh, well, he wasn't corrupted, but that was because he became so beyond humanity, he became beyond good and evil. Whereas Osmodeus, he, in the movie, was much more corrupt, and in the comic, he was sorrowful, and he even asks Dr. Manhattan, after he destroys New York City, he asks him, I did the right thing, didn't I?
Yeah, so that, to me, that says that he's wrestling with his choices, and it's not that he's evil, it's that I know that to do this, greater good will come out of it, but I still feel fucked up inside. So to me, that says more like, hey, I'm wrestling with, I'm doing this horrible thing for this great thing, but it doesn't tell me that he's a supervillain.
But you see,
I feel like that's painting too black and white.
Well, no. You see, that's the thing. What I'm saying is, in the comic, he's a much more conflicted character, and one of the things that the theatrical cut of the movie misses with cutting out the black freighter is the sense of imminence of suspense that the Black Freighter story is clearly building to something, and it's moving in time with the rest of the story, and the way in which, and I forget the actual character's name in the Black Freighter, but when he comes home and he kills the two innocent people, thinking that they're traitors, and he kills his wife, or he viciously beats her at least, thinking that she is a pirate. It's that whole, when you put your blinders on, you're gonna hurt innocent people, and it is exactly like the theme really explored in the second Batman film, The Dark Knight, of the recent trilogy, which is, you live long enough to become the villain. Where you all of the characters started off wanting to be heroes, except for the Silk Spectre, who was kind of thrust into it. But they all, because of their own personal failings, stopped being a hero. That you had Asmodeus, who, in order to bring about peace, kills millions of people. And you can say, well, isn't that worth the cost? And that was something, certainly at the time, I mean, it was a theme from the movie Failsafe, a black and white film. But the theme of, for the greater good, that's saying that the ends justify the means, and the problem is, and this was brought up in the comic, there is no end, only means. Because time doesn't stop. Time is a continuous flow. And so you've killed millions to bring about peace now. There's no question mark at the end of the novel, but it really is, well, how many generations is it going to take for people to kind of forget about that sacrifice? I mean...
But so I understand that you're saying that the ends will wear off, but I disagree that because the ends will wear off, that there are no ends. It's just that the ends are of a finite time. So to me the question is it worth the means for that finite time of the ends before it wears off to maybe even one generation, 2 generations? And that's not a question that I don't know if I can answer that. That's to me why I enjoyed the graphic novel and the movie. I don't know.
But you see, there I think you're missing the point, which is that the ends was to prevent nuclear annihilation, to prevent the extinction of the human race. And so if you sacrifice millions of people on a lie and you stave it off for a generation, it doesn't matter. If the human race becomes extinct...
Well, here's the thing.
It's still...
Dr. Manhattan is still present, and that, well, if we're talking about the movie, Dr. Manhattan is still present, and then we don't know in the book, because we don't know if another alien might come, because it was supposed to be one of, they try to make it seem like it might be one of many.
Well, if there's one, there's probably more.
Right. So the threat is still there. So, if the threat is continuously there, it'll probably last more than I don't know, because I can't really...
Right, but that's the whole thing, though. It's if you compare it now, certainly the Alan Moore comics and the... who's the other one? Roger...
You mean the guy who drew it?
No, not Gibbons, but there's been 2 comic book authors who've had, in the last few years, movies come out of their adaptations. Frank Miller.
Yeah.
And I think that, certainly with Alan Moore, you can only get his comics made into film under the Bush / Tony Blair regimes, because it was, once again, that counterculture movement, that, the anti-Reagan era feelings, the anti-Thatcher feelings, that created that art back in the 80s. That right now we, under Bush, there was the whole, we have to do this thing with security, terrorism is threatening us. And that's why that movie could get made at the time it was, because the threat of terrorism and sacrificing freedom and liberty in the name of security is a recurrent theme to, go back to the 80s and bring back those feelings. And so that's also why zombie movies are back. It's because of, once again, the threat of terrorism has replaced the threat of nuclear annihilation. And so, while that allows the movies to be made, I'm still saying that, if you look at the willingness of people to sacrifice their freedom for security, that has faded in 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so once again, if there's the threat of an alien, if there's a threat of Dr. Manhattan, if nothing happens, people will eventually forget and revert back to their human nature, to their default settings.
Well, this is all speculation because we don't know what happened after the book, but
of course.
Yeah. So if I, like, let's say they just like continuously slip in little, like, not like do that, but like slip in little threats that like continuously remind you that this might happen.
But that would require then killing off,
not necessarily
people, but not necessarily. But that was kind of, at least from what I saw, part of the message of how kind of all vigilantes are kind of psychopaths is that they're willing to do that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. That when you have Rorschach in the film and much more in the comic book, killing criminals, killing rapists, killing child murderers and stuff like that.
Right.
There's no trial, no discovery of evidence. He's sure they're guilty, but there's no proof. And that's kind of the theme of when the vigilantes are above the law, they're going to become corrupt.
Right.
Not because they're seeking power, but because they're doing it for humanity's own good. That is part of the reason why.
Is that
we're not
corrupt though? Is that the right word to use?
Well, let me ask you this. Do you like the Watchmen? Do you think that they're good guys in general? Like, and we can parse up, but like, do you think that they're good guys?
I think they're a reflection of some of humanity's traits. Like, I don't expect anyone to. You can't, like.
No, that's fair. Okay, but all right. So let me just, rather than try and trap you or something, I'll just get to my point. In the beginning of the movie, one thing that I thought was really great was kind of the introduction of the character Silhouette, who is part of the backstory of the Minutemen who preceded the Watchmen, who was this dominatrix type feminazi who was a lesbian, and she gets murdered. She was clearly part of the team, part of the good guys, and she was murdered for her lifestyle, for who she was, really. More so than her lifestyle, but for expressing, her natural feelings.
Right.
And as part of Rorschach's monologues about his disgust of, promiscuity and the dregs of human society, he is also like, she deserved to die because she was a lesbian. Those aren't the words he used, but that's the feeling he conveys. And that's supposed to be reminding the audience, you are not supposed to like Rorschach. He is a violent psychopath. You are not supposed to root for him. When he is in the apartment of Moloch's, and he's going, oh no, 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 and the cops are coming, he's killing cops. And that was also something that, goes back to the Black Freighter, but it's also, he's killing these innocent people who are just trying to do their job, who are trying to enforce order. They're there to stop a murderer. And he's not turning himself in. He is murdering cops. And this is not the Matrix, where it's like, oh, they can become an agent at any time. He's killing innocent people that are trying to do what they think is right. And that's part of the theme of the vigilante justice, is that...
But he's also doing what he thinks is right.
Exactly. And when you make yourself above the law, you're not holding yourself accountable to the same rules that apply to everyone else. At least, in his mind, he is not accountable.
I mean, I agree with you there, but that's neither here nor there when it comes to the movie versus the book.
No. but that's part of the theme discussion that we kind of got on, in which we drew different interpretations of the messaging of both, because they both have very similar messages. That really,
I see your message. I just didn't feel like there are a bunch of messages in the book, but I felt like that wasn't the message. I felt like that was one side of the message. There were like two sides. So there was a side of power corrupts. It's gonna happen. The other side is is it worth being corrupted or messed up for the greater good? And I'm putting this in quote because what does that mean? Right,
and what I'm saying is that greater good message does kind of get lost in the movie as compared to the novel, because also...
Really? No, I completely disagree.
No,
I felt like it was sharper, but...
There's so much more subtlety in the graphic novel, and that's not the movie's fault, because of course you have, infinite budget, infinite space, essentially, when it comes to telling a story on paper versus...
So, if we're talking about subtlety, so when I think about So when I think about like a good movie, book, TV show, I think of the ending, the beginning, more the ending actually, the ending and my favorite moment or scene. So when I was weighing it in my head, ending, the movie one. This is obviously my opinion. And also my favorite scene or image or chapter was also the movie. So, I mean, I'll just let you know which one it is. The one where Dr. Manhattan is on Mars, and he's like dropping the photograph, and in the graphic novel, he's like, it's like 14 seconds from now, I'm gonna be doing, And in the movie, they do the same thing, but I felt like the movie, because of its constraints, because of the time, actually they picked all the best quotes from the graphic novel, and when they tied it together, and the fact that, because when I reread it, I was like, maybe like I wasn't giving the graphic novel its due, but when I reread it, I'm like, the parts where like you hear like the inner monologue, like a lot of that's there, but I didn't like how like they added all this like extra like conversation like for like pages and pages that didn't give us, like he could have given us the exact same thing with just an image or two. And I loved how like the movie, almost all of it was silent except for like that creepy music, like that sort of like organ that sort of built up, and then just him and that like weird like whispery like this is Dr. Manhattan. But I love that they chose that too. I love that voice that they chose. That weird whispery voice, you just hear it continuously, like almost like it's like this little clock kind of working up towards this thing. And,
I certainly agree that there was a much tighter narrative, which worked for a lot of the movie. Mm-hmm. One of the things that really annoyed me when I watched it for the first time was how I felt that in certain scenes, especially more towards the beginning, the music kind of overshadowed the entire scene. Where when you have the Silk Spectre go to meet the Night Owl, and then just like the next scene you have the funeral, and you have the music playing, loudly over everything, and so you get the not even montage sequence, but just, the moving forward of what's going on sequences. I felt.
Well, I feel like both the graphic novel and the movie are very montagey, the way it's written. And,
no, I didn't mean I'm upset about the montage. What upset me was just how the music drowned everything out.
I actually, that was one of the parts I really liked, because it was very, because the message, like what I liked about the movie is that it took a historical piece, like it's very grounded in a very specific part of history, even if it's like pseudo-history, and still made it relevant to our times, but the music is actually grounded in that time period, which I thought was kind of cool. So when I hear that music kind of like swelling up, it gives me more of grounding into that time period.
Okay. Well, I mean, since we're talking about alternate history, first of all, let me say that my favorite part of the movie is definitely the opening sequence, the slow motion kind of Matrix bullet time effects, and the playing of that guy. I'm sure you know who he is. I guess I revealed my best. I'm not a big music guy, so.
Unforgettable.
No. Well, maybe he sung that as well, but.
No, I think that's what the opening sequence is.
No. Anyway, not important. I can't remember the song.
I just watched it.
Okay, well maybe you watched the extended cut, which might have a different song over it. No.
You're talking about the first scene where like the comedian gets killed?
No.
Oh, which one are you talking about?
That's right. The title sequence.
Oh, okay, because that comes after.
Okay.
Okay. That one is the times they are changing.
Yeah, the times they are changing. Okay. That's right.
Okay.
The inclusion of, I guess, the cold open was really well done.
Yeah.
That was great. I know that some people complain about how the superheroes are super, and that the punching the fist through the wall and the crashing the head on the marble countertop is too over the top for some people say, but that's fun, and that's also the medium and stuff. But yeah, and so the title sequence, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
Sorry, the times they are changing. Yeah, we weren't on the same page.
Yeah.
But anyway, I really that's my favorite part of the movie, because I really just like the evolution and showing what's happening.
It's very panelly, like
it's
it's slightly moved, but it's so
Yeah, But one of the things I have to ask about the alternate timeline is that in the history of the movie version,
Right.
because this scene was not in the comic book,
Right.
it seemed to imply that the comedian killed JFK or assassinated JFK because he was on the grassy knoll.
Yeah, yeah.
And so my question is, in our timeline, is JFK still alive, or was he not assassinated?
Maybe it was they hired because isn't one of like the conspiracies that like
The CIA,
yeah.
yeah.
So instead the CIA hired the comedian instead of
whichever guy they actually.
yeah.
Okay, I guess I can accept that. I was kind of hoping that maybe JFK wasn't assassinated in our actual real timeline.
Sorry.
Would have been nice.
Yeah.
But anyway.
That was a cool sequence.
No, that was definitely.
Well, but we both think it's cool, which is kind of funny because that's one of the sequences that I've heard a lot of complaints about. That opening sequence.
Because it shows a lot that really everything in it wasn't in the comic books.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, it was necessary to alert the audience who may not have been familiar with it that this is an alternate reality.
Right.
And that things did not play out the same way in
Right.
this universe that they have in our
I mean,
reality.
I thought it was, in that respect, I thought it was really smart that they threw in Nixon right in the beginning.
Yeah, showing he won his third term
Yeah.
and stuff.
Yeah.
That was certainly helpful because it's also, I remember when I was watching, what's that Christian Bale movie where he was the Wall Street guy and he was like murdering people? American Psycho.
Yeah, American Psycho.
American Psycho. I was watching that movie and it wasn't until like towards the end that I realized, oh, he's not into classic rock, rap music. This is in the 80s. That would make sense that everyone's dressing this way and I think it was when they had like a news report on that. When I was watching that, I didn't realize it was supposed to take place in the 80s. I thought it was just supposed to be contemporary.
Yeah.
And so for me, that a lot of stuff that I didn't understand now makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was very good of them to include because, yes, you do have the voiceover of Rorschach saying 1985. But he said that's kind of thrown out there once, and he doesn't have the same kind of voiceovers that he does throughout the movie because they change his roles. And I do agree that a lot of the small changes were for the better. Like, for example, Night Owl meeting with Asmodeus at the office. Having Night Owl do that instead of Rorschach makes more sense because he's in his civilian clothes, so he can just kind of go in and make an appointment, whereas Rorschach just kind of appears.
Yeah.
And that is a problem in a lot of comic books in which there's not a lot of explanation of how someone got there. And if you don't have teleportation, it's like how would Rorschach have actually gotten into the upper echelon, the executive office suite of like the most richest, powerful, smartest man in the world, if especially at that point, he was a raving psycho.
Yeah. So, I mean, the graphic novel, just to say its merits, like, everyone knows, great story, whatnot, but, like, the fact that the backstory, the history was just so detailed, that world is so fleshed out. You've got those, like, random panels that tell, like, articles.
Right, at the end of each issue,
Yeah.
you have excerpts from Under the Hood, the original Night Owl's tell-all book. You also have excerpts from Rorschach's case file by the psychiatrist.
And just those covers and like all those like inner cover, inside covers, those are all beautifully done. I mean, the art in it is awesome. But and what else did you like about it?
No, like I said, there's a lot of subtlety, and one of the things is that when you reread the graphic novel, and you kind of, now that you know what's going to happen, you kind of pick up on the foreshadowing a lot more, which you don't get in the movie. One of the things that I found really interesting was there was some street artist in the graphic novel who was tagging brick walls with a silhouette of couples, embracing. And that was, and it even spells it out for you in case you didn't pick up on it, about the Hiroshima shadows from the nuclear blast kind of permanently etched into the walls of buildings from the people who got vaporized.
Yeah.
And so there was that kind of foreshadowing. And like I said, the Black Freighter added a lot to the story, and
I agree, yeah, especially in the graphic. I mean, that's where the graphic novel form.
Right,
really
and that's the thing, is
went
that
out.
there's a lot of form differences. Stuff that works in a graphic novel that doesn't work on screen, and I
Right.
can't fault the movie for that.
But actually, I mean, just to let you know, I mean, I have the ultimate cut.
Yeah.
I watched it with the Black Freighter all mixed in, and I love the movie. Clearly, I'm arguing I'm arguing that I enjoy it more than the graphic novel. Although I'd be very upset if there was a world where only the movie existed.
Right.
They both go. I feel like they go
Certainly,
together.
they complement each other.
Because like a lot of other things, like movie, books, like they don't really complement each other. Like I could live without the movie 99% of the time, but I feel like the movie actually adds a different element to it while still complementing the book. So I think both
Right.
have their merits.
Right, but one thing that
Oh, sorry. Just to go back to the Black Freighter thing. So in the Ultimate Cut, they have the Black Freighter scenes mixed in exactly the way graphic novel does. Yeah, you could show us.
okay.
And it's a hard watch to watch all the way through with all that mixed in.
I know,
And
it adds
that's
time
for me.
to it.
Yeah, that's for me loving it. I do love all the scenes that they added in that weren't the Black Freighter.
Yeah, and also though I got reminded of one other thing
Yeah.
that kind of happened in a bunch of scenes, which was in the book, the Silk Spectre in particular, but also the Night Owl were very reluctant to engage in violence. And that was part of their flaws. But in the movie, they seem to almost relish it when the samurai fanboys surrounded them in the alleyway, and when they saw the one guy in the prison scene running towards them, and I'm fine with them
Well, here's
adding the
uh,
action.
Right.
It was the expression, the tone of those scenes that got changed.
Well, I think that was a very specific point in the movie. Like, you see Night Owl all before that, he's essentially flaccid.
Impotent. No,
Yeah.
he's supposed to be impotent.
Yeah.
And
But
that is...
but that was supposed to be sort of, in the movie, like his moment where he kind of gets his groove back, you know, like his, like...
Well, the actual moment is when they rescue the people from the burning building.
Mhm.
That's where he tries to engage in
Right.
sexual congress
Uh-huh.
with the Silk Spectre. And the scene's a little bit different, and it's fine. I'm not even going to the change; it's not even worth it for that scene. But
Yeah.
the point, they both movie and book contain that scene where they
Right.
try to have sex and he can't,
Yeah.
and then they go and rescue the people from the burning building, and then he gets his heart on,
Right.
and that was part of the whole vigilante thing. It's the almost psychotic rush of risking your life. Of it wasn't even so much about helping the people, so much as just getting out there and getting your hands dirty, and maybe you die out there today. That gets him off.
So yeah, no, I totally agree with you. By the way, that is kind of psycho, and like that was a point that was being emphasized.
Right.
And
And also, I want to say that the scene where they make love in the cockpit of Archie, in the graphic novel, in the comic book, where you see the jet of flame come out, it was actually, I don't want to say a throwback to, because I don't know what's in his head, but it certainly to me was reminiscent of when in an early Nick Fury issue where they wanted to show Nick Fury kissing a woman, and the American Comic Book Association was like, no. So instead they showed a gun holster on a bedpost, which is far more suggestive.
Yeah.
That works in a comic book medium,
Right.
because you can't show it in such a way. It's not going to be as exciting for the audience.
Right.
And also, you have censors, but it says a lot more in that visual representation. But in a movie where you have both, the coitus going on and stuff,
Yeah.
the jet, it was silly. And when I was in the movie theater, I still remember it got a laugh out of the audience. Certainly not what the author intended for that scene.
Well, but I think that, I mean, just to talk about like from the director's perspective, I think he changed the tone, but I think that's what he was going for. Like I laughed too, but I think that's what he was going for. I mean, like I don't see why what's wrong with that.
I mean, it was just so over the top with like the Hallelujah song.
But I feel like I think that was the point. The fact that it was over the top like made it like funny and awesome, and like I was cracking up too. I laughed, but
okay.
But I thought that was like a conscious decision.
Okay, and maybe it was to kind of lighten the mood of the storytelling, but once again, it's muddling the message of Night Owl's impotence, and also they pretty much almost completely cut out how the Silk Spectre did not want to be a superhero, and her mother forced her into it. It was there, but it was more of a throwaway line, and her whole thing is she did not want it.
I completely disagree with you there, because like I mean, so also like just to go back to a lot of times you're influenced by what you like best, by what you read or saw first. Yeah. So I actually read the graphic novel like literally a week after I'd watched it. So I watched the movie first, and in watching the movie, I got right off the bat that she didn't want to be a superhero. Like it was like very.
It was clear to you.
Yeah, and this is like this was before I read the graphic novel.
So of course
So
no, I mean like I said, it was
maybe to you it was more subtle just because in the graphic novel it is talked about a lot, but the graphic novel is a lot thicker.
Yeah,
so
no, like I said, unlimited budget.
Yeah.
And so I do feel though that just a lot of the character traits, particularly of the Night Owl and of Silk Spectre, got lost, in which we're really not, at least my interpretation of it is, we're not supposed to be rooting for any of these people. That this is a reflection of humanity, but that we're not supposed to want Rorschach to get away.
Well,
we're supposed to realize that Dr. Manhattan, it really is best for him to go away, because he has ungodly power. And like when you see him just kind of explode people, I think that it's common knowledge that when Alan Moore was first coming up with the concept, before really the story was written, he had wanted to use established superheroes. And he wasn't able to get the licensing rights. And we can kind of tell who some of the characters are influenced by. There's a whole thing about how it's actually this no-brand, independent line comic, but we know who they're supposed to be. And when you really think about the kind of power that this superhero has, it is really scary who Dr. Manhattan is supposed to be. And there was a really great comic that showed the villain's perspective of that hero. All right, we'll just say Superman. Where when you really think how lucky...
If you didn't know that, turn this off. You don't deserve to listen to that.
But just, the power that Superman has of just the eye beams to vaporize people, and that's what Manhattan was doing, and just the blood and the guts in the gang den, the gangland scene in the movie, and just how vile it was, and then you have him in Vietnam, the towering megalith, just disintegrating people.
It's like, but they're despicable, but it's like cool too. Like,
no, yeah.
That's why I was gonna ask you, what do you mean by rooted for? Because like most people, their favorite character is the comedian or Rorschach, and those are the two of the most despicable people.
No, exactly, and that's why I mentioned earlier about how the writers of the movie version were very wise to insert the silhouette, because they were trying to remind the audience, do not like Rorschach, do not root for him. He is a murderer, a killer, who judges people way too harshly. And the fact that you could say that the narrative is mostly him, that he is the closest thing to a single protagonist, even though it's really an ensemble cast, it's still, he is a bad guy. And it's one of those things where, as a juvenile, as a... we're still good? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Growing up as a kid, it's kind of okay to think that, that's really cool. Oh, how badass with a comedian. He doesn't care.
Yeah.
But as you mature, you're supposed to realize, wait a minute. Well, first of all, if you like the comedian...
You're fucked up, man.
Yeah.
You're fucked up.
he shot a pregnant woman and blamed Superman. Who had nothing to do with the situation. He's like, you could have stopped me.
But he's right.
He
could have.
He's only partially right.
Doesn't make him any less of a douchebag.
Because that's basically because what the comedian was saying in that scene is, you are a god, and because you step back, everything that happens is your fault. There's a great cartoon called Futurama, which kind of had a god episode where one of the characters became unto a god. And, interfering too much, interfering too little, you can't get it right, better just go away. The watchmaker, the blind watchmaker.
Maybe I misinterpreted this, but I thought he meant that because Dr. Manhattan got so powerful, he's losing touch with his humanity. So it's like he doesn't even know what should bother him or not anymore. It's just like, oh, whatever. Like on like some level, it didn't really bother him, even though he acted like it did.
Well, that kind of goes to the point of power and responsibility,
right,
where he had the power to stop, to stop that situation from occurring, and he didn't. And so the real question is, to the audience, this is something that is being asked to the audience: is it Dr. Manhattan's fault that the comedian murdered that woman? And my take on it is no. Because he's becoming more removed from humanity, and that's actually a good thing. Because if we come to depend upon him,
right,
then we lose our own humanity and our own free will and choice.
So, anyway, speaking of Dr. Manhattan, sorry, not anyway, but speaking of Dr. Manhattan, another point in the movie's favor for me is the way they pulled off Dr. Manhattan, like the way they did like the acting, the way the character came out, the voice that they picked, the tone. I thought they got everything like amazing. So
yeah, the only
I love the subtlety in his
yeah.
face. Like you see like the actor who did it, like you could see like the subtlety of, hey, like I don't care, but in the back there's a little bit of still caring, like getting that whole dynamic.
I think that with the exception of the Silk Spectre, it was perfect casting. Everyone was great, that they were delivering their dialogue correctly, and like I'm saying, it's a great film. It can be enjoyed even if you love the comic, and there's nothing really wrong with it. It's just not as good.
A lot of people would disagree with you. A lot of people have a lot of bones to pick.
Well, like I said, you're going to get people who are like, in the book that was supposed to be a red sweatshirt, and it's clearly blue in the movie, and it's like, who cares?
Yeah.
Like, they don't explain in the theatrical.
I'm not surprised how much like we're like arguing like supposedly opposite points, but I feel like I agree with almost everything you're saying about the movie and the book. But at the end of the day, I mean,
no, it is a personal taste issue. But like, well, one thing, which again, one minor point is they don't explain in the theatrical cut Dr. Manhattan's hydrogen symbol.
No, they do.
In the theatrical cut, they don't. In the extended cut, I'm sure they do, because there's actually a lot of scenes in the movie where if you're paying attention, you can kind of see where, okay, there was supposed to be another minute there that they cut out, because, for instance, in the bar scene, where Rorschach and Night Owl are roughing up the customers,
they extended it,
you can see one of the knotheads, and the Night Owl turn to look at him, and then that's it. But and that's the theatrical cut, and so I'm sure in the extended cut they do actually play out the scene that occurred in the graphic novel.
Yeah, they do.
But that's fine, because that's a matter of pacing. That's a matter of really, like I said, the medium.
I mean, the audience can correct us, whoever's wrong, but I actually think you're wrong. I don't think they changed it in the ultimate cut. They don't go into a lot of detail about it. They briefly mention. They don't say they don't say I picked this symbol because of blah blah. But all he says is if I'm
gonna have a symbol, it should be that. In the theatrical cut, which I just watched today before I came here, they just have him do that. In the extended cut, I'm sure that they have him actually say, if I'm going to have a symbol. But I just watched it like an hour or two ago.
Okay. But I mean, like, either way, like, both cuts, they don't go into the great detail.
No, and they don't need to.
Yeah, I actually felt like that whole going to different costumes, like, they could have shortened that in the graphic novel and made it better. Like, I feel like it would have tightened it up, because I felt like that's one of the things with the graphic novel. I feel like it has a little too much fat. I like a lot of the fat, because a lot of the fat's like interesting, but like I like a lot of the inserts and blah blah blah. But like I'm talking about the actual scenes that some of them could have just been cut in half.
And
like,
I mean,
I'm nitpicking, by the way.
Yeah, I know, and that's the thing. That's the same thing about saying, well, the movie cut out this, and it's just such a minor detail. And it's like, look, you can't expect perfection and for one author's work to meet each and every one of your personal tastes and satisfaction. And I don't think that we're even having really a discussion of those nitpicking details, because people have created laundry lists on the internet, and that's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about big stuff. Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, the change and Asmodeus at the end, it is a huge difference between the comic book and the movie. Where in the movie, he is much more villain-esque, and in the comic book, he is much more, this is right, this is, what I'm trying to do.
I don't know. I kind of disagree with your use of the word villain. Yeah. Like, I agree that he is the antagonist of the movie. Okay.
Okay, Guild of Calamitous Intent. Whoa, villain is on. We deal with antagonist relations.
I mean, normally I wouldn't make that distinction in a superhero movie, but I feel like here it's warranted because he's built up to be the person we hate or dislike, but doesn't mean he's necessarily the bad guy. I mean, everyone's sort of the bad guy. But everyone's also sort of the good guy too, though.
Yeah, they're more protagonists and antagonists. So you're right there.
They're more like they're more just playing to a certain philosophy or a certain like bent on life, and they're living it out like the way they see with the world.
Right. And look, he Asmodeus is killing.
He seems like a
people.
douche, but
he's killing millions of people in the name of peace, and I think that in the comic book he was much more he was portrayed as much more conflicted and uncertain, but at the same time this was the best answer. Like, this was the best solution to the nuclear arms race that he could come up with.
No, I completely agree with that. Although, what I loved about the movie was, so after the whole thing with Dr. Manhattan, like at the final shot, you see of like them like raising out of the pyramid, and you just see Asmodeus like sitting on that like weird like Egyptian chair throne, and it's like you could see in his face he's like, this fucking sucks, kind of like he's like you could see in his face that he's conflicted. They don't say anything, but as they're panning out, you could see it's like the weight of the world, is on him. So I mean, they don't spell it out, but it's there subtly at the end. But I agree that the graphic novel all throughout is much more conflicted. Also, what's up with the cat?
Well, no, that was explained more in
it was explained comic book. It was explained in the graphic novel. No, I mean, what's up with the cat in the movie? Like they
he's just there.
Yeah.
Well,
like when I first watched the movie, because I told you I read the graphic novel. Yeah. So that was the only thing that I like. Everything else, like I was able to piece together. But that was like,
well, I think the
why is Cringer there?
Well, I think in the movie he's just there to be like, this guy's so crazy rich he has an animal you've never heard of. Which is a Simpsons joke. Yeah. With an episode where like Ron Howard's like, I'm taking my kids to the zoo. Oh, like it's like, no, it's a rich people zoo with animals you've never heard of. Daddy, we're gonna miss the fantastic hippopotamus.
I thought it was cool, and I didn't feel like it needed an explanation, but it was just like, that was random.
Yeah, it kind of, in my mind, made him more villain-esque. That he had the weird
antagonist-esque.
I'm saying, from my perspective, when I watched the movie, him having the Great Links made him more villain-esque at the end. Exactly, But then he also,
like Dr. Claw.
But also, and I don't think that in the theatrical trailer, but he was actually very sad that he had to sacrifice it in order to try and kill Dr. Manhattan. Was that in the extended cut?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's good.
Well, no, like, I don't know.
Like
I don't know if you mean, he just says, I'm sorry, because, like, he doesn't, like, go on and on. He says, I'm sorry because, and that's it.
Okay. Once again, not a big deal. But let us talk about the biggest difference a bit more.
Sure.
Because I think we're getting to the end
Yeah.
here. And so let's kind of talk about the ending
Right.
of, versus the two. Where I understand that you take out
Well,
the genetics, you take out all the scientists and artists going to the island. Because that's a very important point, is that the idea of taking the greatest minds, the greatest artists, and putting them in a sanctuary is a very, nuclear Holocaust idea.
Mhm.
And that's what you were supposed to be thinking as a reader for the first time, is that what's going on that island is trying to save humanity's best and brightest.
yeah.
But then, in fact, they're actually creating this alien monstrosity, a Cthulhu-esque monster on that scale and the psychic damage and everything. And then Asmodeus kills all of them.
Mhm.
And he kills them to keep the secret of what they've constructed.
Right.
But also consider he just killed the greatest minds, authors,
Mhm.
artists, scientists, engineers, doctors. And he just murders them to keep the secret of what actually happened. And so the ending of the monster being teleported in because Asmodeus tried to replicate Dr. Manhattan's teleportation ability, and they couldn't do it with the being staying alive, and so it's like, okay, let's teleport in this alien, make people think they're interdimensional aliens, and let's build towards that, which is something that economist Krugman is advocating for. That was a jab at Krugman, for those of you who know who he is. But anyway, that was absent in the movie. And you feel that was to the movie's benefit.
Yes.
Are you saying that you just didn't like the big monster alien, or that for the shortened format, it was better to make it Dr. Manhattan the threat?
I actually think that the graphic novel would have been better if Dr. Manhattan was the threat that they used, because it's just a much more, I feel like it's very comic booky to have the alien threat be this giant squiddy thing, and especially when I looked at the panels, I don't know, it just had a totally different tone from the rest of it. It didn't seem as consistent. And then when I saw the Dr. Manhattan ending, I was like, this makes sense because it's a tighter narrative. The whole movie and the whole book is about us teetering on the brink of extinction, a nuclear extinction, and Dr. Manhattan is sort of that same sort of power. He's almost a human representation of that nuclear danger. So I felt like for him to be the villain, or not the one.
The one to blame.
Yes.
The Batman when it was actually Two-Face.
Yeah.
Oh, spoiler alert! Spoiler alert!
I'm not the one who blah blah blah. Oh, by the way, just to briefly, I thought Rorschach did a better Batman.
Oh, absolutely!
It was a perfect. If Rorschach was that would have been awesome.
Yeah, they should have James Earl Jones, voiceover.
Yeah, but anyway,
yeah.
So I just felt like it was cleaner. It was also more impactful. I felt like with that ending where Dr. Manhattan's I see what you're saying, but he's I'm kind of tired of all this. It just made it everything come together more. I felt like, and then that shot of them going away from Asmodeus, and then he's I'm gonna be sitting in my throne room and I'm awesome, but I suck kind of thing. I felt like it was all tighter.
Yeah. Okay.
I like when you talked about the island and talking about he's able to kill the best and the brightest. That I actually like the way. I feel like the way you're describing it sounds better than the way it read on the page to me. It's in principle, I agree with you, but for some reason when I was reading it on the page, it didn't have the same impact as the way you're saying it to me. I don't know why.
Right. But I just want to make the counterpoint to what you're saying about when you actually think about it, having Dr. Manhattan as the antagonist of humanity at the end of the movie actually makes less sense. It unravels, because part of the point in both the movie and the comic book was that Dr. Manhattan was the counterbalance to Soviet aggression. That there was a lot more about the invasion of Afghanistan, a potential invasion, an actual invasion of Pakistan,
Right.
and Soviet expansion, and nuclear missiles going back and forth. And it was the mutual assured destruction kind of thing,
Right.
except that Dr. Manhattan made it mutual assured destruction of Russia and protection of America. And so, and they made a point about like, oh, even if he stops 99%, 1% still enough to kill the world.
Yeah.
But the point is, if Dr. Manhattan is the antagonist of humanity, how do they stop him? Because if it's interdimensional aliens, now instead of watching Russia, Dr. Manhattan's watching out for aliens. Dr. Manhattan's traveling in somewhere else, combating these and protecting humanity. And so now America no longer has its protector, instead the world has its protector. And so I think that by making it a third party threat, it actually in the long run makes it a more cohesive lie that holds together. Where the government can say Dr. Manhattan is protecting us, whereas what are people going to say about who's protecting the world from Dr. Manhattan?
Well, here's the thing. Not to go, so in Justice League, they have this whole thing with like, okay, these guys are protecting us, the Justice League's protecting people of the United States, but like, who's protecting us from
Who watches the Watchmen?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like,
and they had Tim Curry do the voice of the Glenn Beck parody.
And
the cartoon.
So the third party kind of like, it still has that like sort of, like the countries themselves don't feel agency to keep that piece together like as much. Like by having Dr. Manhattan be the antagonist to all of them, yeah, they're all probably like, we don't know what the fuck to do, but that would make it even more urgent for them to scramble together, come together, and really figure out what we can do.
Such as perhaps making more Dr. Manhattans? Because it's one of those things where I know that they don't explain it in either the movie or the graphic novel, but we have to assume that they did a RoboCop 2
I'm sure they tried it.
kind of thing where they kept on trying to replicate the experiment and having, the super soldier that they trust and can control rather than the scientist who they don't really know, and they kept on dying.
So I feel like the argument that you're saying could be applied to both cases. Like I feel like your argument is valid, but it doesn't vindicate one situation over the other in my eyes.
Okay. And I guess that's one that we have to disagree. And certainly that is the biggest difference between the two. And no one can argue with that. That is...
So I guess like what I'm saying is I like the ending better storyline plot-wise. Not necessarily, like what's going to happen this or that. Like, but I just feel like it was just a tighter narrative that way. And it just seemed more cohesive.
I do agree that I think that for the movie, it works. It holds it together, like you said, a tighter narrative, but at the same time, the more you think about it, I feel it unravels. Whereas with the comic book ending, it can unravel, but I think it holds together stronger, in my opinion, than the movie ending.
Okay. Do you want to add in your final word? Or is that your final word?
Well, I'll add in my final thoughts as far as, I gave the actress who played the Silk Spectre a lot of, whatever. She's probably a better actress than I could ever be. And so, while complaining about her wooden performance, because it's easy to criticize, it's much more difficult to create. And it's more difficult to actually perform and do. And so, while I was kind of riffing, I just want to say that the movie was great. And her performance isn't terrible. To me, it was noticeable, but like I said, I'm sure she's a better actor than I am. And so while I've criticized her, really good performance, decent, perhaps, but it's really not fair to mock those who can when you yourself have never even tried.
Right. It's kind of funny that you bring that up, because I went to see, what's that, improv in New York City?
The Upright Citizens Brigade?
Yeah, so I just saw a show of that last night, and I was like, this was like the amateur hour version, and I was like, God, some of these guys are pretty terrible, and we were just making fun of them, and then I was thinking about it, and I was like, wait, I don't know if I can do a better job than them. I mean, improv, anyone can do it, but to make it funny, they were doing a pretty decent job, all things considered, so a lot of it's just you can criticize, but it's not as easy to do, People who can't do criticize.
Basically.
Yeah. Or teach. So, last word for me. just to go back to the movie's choice of color palette, I thought it was really interesting. If you think about, especially that scene where Dr. Manhattan's on Mars, you see all that red and blue, and you know that scene where Dr. Manhattan doesn't really stop the comedian from killing that girl that we were talking about earlier. There's a lot of red and green and blue there, so I like the use of the juxtaposition of colors. They do that a lot in the graphic novel. That's pulled directly from the novel, which I appreciated. The graphic novel, though, the color scheme isn't quite as crisp, and when you see it on the movie, it's just like it just pops, and like a lot of it's like kind of like I know the medium and like the time.
Yeah, 30 years later.
Yeah, exactly. But
or 20 years.
Yeah, but just because it's better because of time, it still means to me that it looks better.
That's a fine comment to make. Certainly, CGI technology made a lot of the scenes possible and just made it really enjoyable visually.
Right.
Like I said, don't have any problems with it. The movie overall.
Yeah. So, I mean, to finish my final word, two things that make a movie for me, I think I've talked about this before, but the ending and like thinking about like what's my favorite part. And if I think about both of those between the graphic novel and the movie for me has both. So that's pretty much all I had to say about that. Although we agreed on a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, more than we disagreed.
Yeah, I feel like we agreed about like 90 to 95%, like a lot more than...
Well, I think it was more like 93 to 97%.
No, it's 92%.
Math teacher.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we'll agree to agree, but disagree on this one.
Sure.
So that's another episode of Steve
and Max.
And we'll see you next time. And that's the end of that chapter.
Stay classy, San Diego.